Today we are turning these into a set of salt and pepper grinders. How's it? My name is Dylan. A very warm welcome to my workshop. And in today's edition of PlyCreations, we are back at the lathe. I think I've mentioned before that I spend nowhere near enough time at the lathe, nor do I think I'm particularly good at it. In spite of those two factors, I really enjoy turning, and today I have an opportunity to turn something I don't often do, and that will be a set of salt and pepper grinders. The weird thing is, this is now the second set I'm turning in the last, say, 3 months. The first set went to my niece, and this one is going to go to a friend of mine. I'm filming this video that you're watching today on a whim, so it's neither very well prepared nor scripted, but let's see how we get on, and I'll see you over at the lathe. We start today's turning with the blank mounted between centers. I'm turning today what we call in South Africa white beech, and we are told that that comes from Europe. You'll also see that I've done some basic layouts just to give me some idea of what the outside diameter is going to be when it's all said and done. And I've then turned the blank into an octagon just to make the process of rounding the blank quicker. Try and get it to not look like that. It's slightly lopsided and going to be unbalanced when I get to that, but I'll worry about that later. Turning salt and pepper grinders, more than anything else on the lathe, for me, what is important is the order of operations, and that is the reason for making this video today. When we get to very specific areas, I'll then bring you in and tell you about those in more detail. We are starting with the top on this side. I'm going to put a tenon here, swing the blank around, proceed to round the blank before we continue with any one of the other steps. If you need any help with your tenons and making nice, secure and strong tenons, I've done a video on my channel. I'll leave the link on the screen as well as in the description, and I've also got a downloadable document that you can print out and keep at your lathe to help you ascertain or assess your tenons for suitability and strength. I'll leave those links in the description. So I'm going to turn the tenon quickly, measure the size of the tenon using a set of calipers which I've already set to the jaws of my my chuck. Turn the tenon, swing it around, and then proceed to round the blank. Got the blank somewhat round. I've got 1 or 2 flat spots, and you'll see that I've got marks that I've made here on a previous take. I've got a bad habit of going too far when rounding blanks, so I tend to make the outside diameter too small, which means I usually need to start from scratch. We're going to do the layout of, or the basic layout of where the mechanism will sit within the grinder. Now, if you turn these often enough, you could have something like a story stick that will have your measurements on it. You simply butt it up against your blank, make your marks. But because I don't turn these very often, I don't have a story stick, and story sticks have a really bad habit of disappearing in my workshop. This is going to be the bottom of the grinder. So I will bring up the mechanism and eyeball around about 5 millimeters from the bottom surface up to here, so that this doesn't sit on whatever surface you're putting your grinder on. That's going to sit into a recess we're going to drill. So I'd like to make a mark of where that is going to be roughly, and then the top of the mechanism section here, I'm going to make a mark there. Then up from the shaft, this assembly here keeps everything straight, and this will be in the head of the grinder, and that's what's going to cause the turning action, of course, to grind your salt or your pepper. I'm marking the bottom of where that will be. However, now we are going to be splitting the head and the body of the grinder. This line does not represent the top of the body. This is going to be sitting inside the body on a tenon, so that will be actually in the body of the grinder itself. So I'm going to come up, I usually do around about 15 millimeters from that line, and that represents what will be the top of the body of the grinder, and from there onwards will be the head, or the section that you turn when using the grinder. Excuse me. What I'm going to be doing now is in this area here, I'm going to be turning another tenon, and I'm doing that with my parting tool so I can get in there. I will then split the head and the body from one another so I can bring the body back and start drilling the holes that all the mechanisms will fit into. We'll start with this section with my first tip of the day, and you'll notice that this whole blank is loose between the chuck and the tail stock. And I'll typically use this method if I want to have my blank as well centered on the lathe as I possibly can. And how I do that is I'll put the tenon loosely into the chuck. I'll bring my tail stock up, wind the tail stock until I start feeling a little bit of resistance. And that tells me now that the shoulder of the tenon is registered against the top surface of the jaws. And only then will I tighten the chuck jaws. And I find that that just helps me keep the blank as center as I possibly can. And when I drill holes into a blank, when I'm making or turning something, and the holes are going to be especially long, I like to have the blank as well centered as I possibly can. The next step is we are going to be drilling the first hole for the bottom of the recess, or where this area specifically, turn it into the camera, this area specifically is going to be recessed into. Now that hole needs to clear that lip, and that is I think about 43 millimeters, so I'll be using a 45 millimeter Forstner bit. Now, important to remember, and this is my second tip, is if you are drilling a series of holes, always drill from large to small. What that allows you to do is the tip of the Forstner bit will then register into the hole that was left by the earlier size or the larger size of drill bit. I also, when I make more than one item, I will typically keep my drill bits mounted in chucks, and that just makes the whole process a little bit more efficient. That's the first one we are going to use. So I'm going to get the tailstock out of the way, proceed to drill the hole. Now the depth here is also relatively important in that I need to, as I mentioned before, and now I've lost the mechanism, that needs to sit in the recess, and this bottom section should not be touching whatever surface you'll be putting the grinder on. Typically what I like is you need to measure from the bottom of that lip to the top of that mechanism there. It's roughly about 20 millimeters, so I like to have it around about 25 millimeters. What's nice on the Forstner bits that I have is from the bottom edge of the Forstner bits up to that dark line there is around about 25 millimeters. So I'll just eyeball from the side until I reach that depth, and I know I'm at the correct depth. So I'll drill that hole quickly. I've got the hole drilled for the recess to accommodate this section. Yeah, it's a little bit deeper than 20 millimeters. And what I'll do now is, the bottom was rough before. I'll clean that up, and I've already done it in the previous take, but I'll show you how I do it. I'll clean it up with a spindle detail gouge. And after that's done, of course, because that hole is now potentially a little bit more shallow, I'll check the depth again and drill it a little bit deeper to make sure I'm at roughly about 20 millimeters. Two tips here is round the bottom corner there. We will be sanding the grinder once we're all done. However, having that round, as these edges get quite sharp and they may cut you. Also, try and slope from the outside inwards. What that allows is when the grinder sits on the table or any flat surface, it ensures that it sits nice and flat. Check the depth on the hole quickly, and that is about 20.5 millimeters. The next step is going to be drilling the smaller hole that the body of the mechanism then sits into, and that will be, the depth will be from the back of that lip up to the back of the mechanism here. I've measured it, it's 38 millimeters give or take, so I'm going to be using a 38 millimeter drill bit. And if I can just find it, there we go. That is the drill bit that I'll be using. Now the distance or the depth of the hole is determined, as I mentioned, from the back of the lip to the top of the assembly, and that is roughly about 35 millimeters. Now to be able to gauge the depth that I'll be drilling that in is I mark the shafts of my drill bits with a permanent marker so that I know how deep I need to drill. I'm going to set up, drill that hole, and then I'll bring you back for the hole that's going to go all the way through the body of the grinder. 2 more holes and then we are done with the bottom part of the grinder. The first hole I'll be drilling is the one that goes all the way through the body of the grinder, and that will contain your salt or either your pepper. I'm going to be using this drill bit. Let me just check the size. It is a 35 millimeter diameter drill bit, and what's cool is I'm going to be using a new tool to be able to extend in to the hole. Now I'm only going to be drilling this halfway through and not completely through. I find that the longer the hole is, going from 2 sides will give you a more accurate and a more centralized hole. And the other reason is I still need to drill the recess that the tenon is going to be fitting into for the top. That is going to be larger than the hole that I'm drilling through, and I need to have some area that this drill bit will register into on that side, so I'm not drilling all the way through. This is a really cool tool. I'll leave a link in the description where you can get one of those. I get them from a company called Creative Turning here in South Africa. Go and have a look at the website. Maybe you can have a look at the description. I'm not sure where you'll find it elsewhere in the world. What's nice about this end goes into a Morse 2 taper, so that will go directly into my tailstock. But on this side, it's got a collet. And because it's got a collet, it means it keeps the drill bit centered along the path, or sorry, along the center of your lathe. Any extension where you put the drill bit in and you have a grub screw or set screw that needs to keep the drill bit in place, it will always be slightly off center because you have a larger hole there to be able to put the shaft in the first place. And because this has got a collet, it will always keep the drill bit center. I'm going to install this, drill halfway through, and when I turn the blank around, I'm going to show you how we're going to chuck that up so we can drill from the other side. So the through hole has been drilled halfway through, and now we're going to go in from the other side. But first recess that needs to be drilled out is the one that the tenon is going to sit into for the top. You may have noticed that on the previous clip that I had my wedding band on while working on the lathe. That can be potentially dangerous, so for the rest of the video and the rest of the day I've taken my wedding band off. So for you guys who are about to type in the comment section that I'm a dangerous woodworker, it's one of those cases as do as I say and not the way I do. Wedding band is off. Mounting the blank into or onto the lathe now is I'm going to use a second chuck that I have, and on this one I've got my pen jaws and going to put it into the hole and then expand. I'm using the same technique that I showed you earlier for centering the workpiece, and instead of a tailstock now I'm going to be using the drill bit. I've marked the middle of the blank, and now, as I did before, feed the tailstock slightly until I feel a little bit of resistance. I'm now against the jaws, and now expand the jaws. This is where one needs to be careful when expanding the jaws so that you do not overexpand and crack your blank. So tighten slightly. Very important that you don't extend the jaws too far. On this side, from this surface here, the hole needs to be around about 10 millimeters deep. That's about 3/4 of the distance between the bottom of the drill bit and top, and I'll simply just eyeball that. However, I do need to get rid of this section here. This workpiece extends quite a ways from the chuck and because I'm using expansion and I didn't over tighten it, there is a risk that it may come loose if I take away too much material at a time on this side. So when you remove this, do be careful that you'll take fine cuts. So I've drilled the recess that the tenon will go into. As with on this side, I've cleaned up this face and I've also rounded that corner. And what simply now remains is to drill with the 35mm drill bit until we meet the hole in the middle. So moving on to the top or the head of the grinder, I've already got it mounted on my other chuck with my standard 50mm jaws that I had it in originally. I'm now going to be forming the tenon that goes into that hole, and I know what that diameter needs to be based on the drill bit. I've set a set of calipers slightly over large to the drill bit, so I'll do it, make the tenon over large and then make it smaller until I get a nice fit into the mortise or the recess, keeping in mind that it shouldn't be sloppy, but it does need to turn. I do need to add, and I forgot to mention, that I don't turn the full tenon when I start fitting. I'll go only a very small section, because otherwise if I go too far and get it wrong, I don't lose this full section of lumber, but only this area here. So I'll turn a small area and then do my test fits, get that right, and then widen the tenon. And I've actually gone too far with this tenon, and that the diameter is too small, and there's a slight bit of slop, not a lot, and only a slight bit. That is a little bit too loose. What I'll do now is I'll move back, make sure that I don't turn the tenon down as far as I did here, and see what the fit looks like. I need about 15mm, so this may not be an issue, but that's one of the main reasons why you only turn a small, section. There we have the final test fit. So there's no slop up or down, and I can turn the head quite easily. And that is exactly what you want, because you would want the top and bottom to twist on one another in use. What is left to do now on the head is to drill out the hole for the last piece of hardware, and I will typically drill it slightly deeper than from the back of the lip to the top, and that allows the shaft to protrude slightly further. If I've made any mistakes in the measuring process in my lengths, that will allow any of that extra space to be taken up by drilling a deeper hole. So that final hole done, major work on the grinder is done. I've marked here the depth of 14mm. That's how deep I've drilled the hole. So from that surface there, I've marked 14mm. That gives me an idea of where to start parting off for the head section, so that I don't go into the hole that I've just drilled, leaving myself enough space. Turning this corner on the top here, I find that quite hard, so I'm going to try something new today on these two, but after I've done that and given myself some indication of where the top needs to sit, I'll bring the other blank in and get it to this particular point. It's day 2 and we've got two somewhat similar blanks in hand. It's amazing how even the smallest project can turn into a marathon the moment you select record on your camera. It's also turned into a slight troubleshooting session. This one in particular has turned out diameter wise not exactly where I wanted it, and it is shorter than I expected it to be. So I'll take you over to the lathe and I'll show you what I've got. Here's our first problem, and I've got the blank too short. The top or the head of the grinder is going to be right here where the blank meets the chuck jaws, and I won't be able to round this and get in there. So I've tried various options on the chuck jaws, or different chuck jaws that I have available to me, but by far and away the simplest option is going to be to install a crown drive, get the blank between centers, and then proceed to get it to final shape. I'll do that and I'll bring you in for a different angle to show you how I go about that process. try to keep the shapes of the salt and pepper grinders that I make simple, and it's really just a parallel tube, and I made the diameter here slightly smaller to help with grip. I'll be adding some features to these grinders, and I usually do it with all the grinders that I turn. I do so using my skew. The first ones I'm going to do is make 2 lines or a line on the bottom of the grinder, and that will help the user remember which one is salt and which one is pepper. Of course, we use a set of grinders that I made in our own house, and I still tend to get confused between the two, but hopefully that will help. Next, I move on to where the top and the body come together, and the reason why you want to break that line is so that you don't get any tear out or breakout in use right on that edge, and it also seems to make the grain flow better from the one section to the next. And again, we are using the skew. I may sometimes add a line top and bottom of the one I've just made. I like the way it looks now. Next step is to sand it down to its final finish. I won't bore you with that particular process, so I'll do that, and then I'll get the second blank up to this state, and then I'm going to show you how we finish it off. Both grinders have been shaped and sanded to the final finish, and now we turn our attention to the final step here at the lathe, and that is to finish off the top and removing that nib and sanding it down. I've got the top mounted into a jam chuck, and the only reason I have a jam chuck in place is because I thought my pin jaws would work, or my pin jaws would work, and they didn't. So luckily I had a jam chuck in the right size in the jam chuck bin. Say that a few times. Remember, keep your jam chucks. You never know when you may find one in the bin that suits your purpose. Also, a tip: whenever you have an item in a jam chuck, always be careful that you don't take too large cuts while working. So fine cuts, take your time. I'll remove the nip, neaten up the top, sand down the top, and that will be the work at the lathe. There you have 2 somewhat similar salt and pepper grinders. I always joke that I can turn almost anything, but if there's more than one, don't expect them to look exactly the same. Jokes aside, they're not that bad. All that's left now is to glue in the mechanisms and apply the finish. The chosen color for this customer is blue crane, which also happens to be the South African national bird. Then these salt and pepper grinders will be heading off to their brand new owner, who also happens to be the founder of the company that makes the finish that I'm using at the end of this particular project. I hope he enjoys his new grinders, and I hope you enjoyed watching me make them. Until I see you next time, I hope you have a good one. Thank you as always for joining me in my workshop. Remember, enjoy your time at the lathe, and until I see you next time, have a good one. Cheers.